I am with IBM Corporation. I do media relations with IBM. And since I discovered about 10 years ago that I was adopted, I have been interested in trying to get publicity on the situation. And what Robin and I wanted to do today was to give you some information and make it very interactive. I want to give you some thoughts, but at any time I'd like you to interrupt me for questions, because the object is for all of us to gain a little bit better idea of what works to get publicity and what doesn't. Those of you who were here on Thursday, I'm sure, are aware of the magnetism that a reunion has for the media. They're, like it or not, the media has certain things that they want. And if you're interested in getting publicity, a good way to start is whatever city you live in, regardless of the size, start looking differently at the media than you used to. There are all sorts of publications, dailies, weeklies. There are some that are your radio stations, your television stations. Regardless of the size of them, or regardless of whether or not you think they're very influential in the community, somebody reads these publications, and some of them are very profitable. My local paper, I don't think is the greatest on news. It's a weekly, but it does carry a lot of advertising, and it'll always exist, and it'll always be there. And you never know when somebody on that publication will be interested in doing something. Whether it's a weekly or a daily, whether it's a talk show or whether it's the TV news, they've got to have something fresh to write about. And even if the reporter isn't very motivated, he's got an editor or she's got an editor behind them who insists that we've got to have something different, we've got to have something new, we've got to fill up these blank pages every week. So if you're interested in getting publicity about adoption reform, decide what it is that you want to say, and then you look at all of the publications, look at all of the media, try to find somebody who seems to be writing about a variety of subjects, feature writers, people who have talk shows. Radio, there's a couple of all-news radio stations in Chicago. Those of you who are from Chicago know WBBM, WMAQ. It's all news around the clock. In the evening, it's talk shows. But they consume a tremendous amount of information, and their producers, just like those on TV news, are constantly under pressure, not only from their station management, but also by the Nielsen ratings, to get something on that's interesting. Here in Chicago, WBBM television is in third place on the network affiliates. That means that their station management is putting that much more pressure on those TV news producers and on the anchor people, who, as you know, make big salaries, to come up with something to not only fill the time, but answer the question, how are we going to get into second place, and how are we going to get into first place, and why can't we? So, as you saw by the reunion coverage here, the media is drawn to certain kinds of stories. There's two problems with publicizing a conference like this one. Number one, people stories always sell the best. You can take that to the bank. The problem with a conference is that the conference is devoted to ideas, to philosophies, to something that is not visual in the case of TV, unless you have a reunion or something that the camera can focus on. For a print reporter, it's just another conference unless you make it more. Well, let's say we didn't have a reunion. Well, why should I come from downtown, make the effort, come out here, talk about issues, and I don't understand the subject anyway. So then you find ways to do it. So in your towns, you find out what you want to talk about. Maybe you want to talk about the need for open adoption. Maybe you want to talk about adoption reform. Maybe you want to get people interested in forming a support group. Maybe you have a self-serving idea, and that's just as good, that you feel because of the way you were treated As a member of the triad, you want to do something to do it, to change it. So you find out who on the local newspaper, who on the local TV station, who on the local radio station might be interested in this. And you can't tell from what they write unless they happen to write about adoption. So you find out what they are interested in. And you approach them in one of two ways. You call them up, you write them a letter. Safest way is to write them a letter because then you never interfere with their deadlines. And you lay out in a letter, you write the letter, you see that it's 3 pages, and you cut it down. You call them up, you practice calling them up, and you practice what you're going to tell them, and you see it takes 5 minutes, so you cut it down to 1 minute. Find out what they're interested in, you contact them, you tell them who you are and what you're interested in. Do they do stories on this? Are they interested in stories on this? If nothing else, could you send them a card with your name on it, what you're interested, so if they are interested in this, they come to you. And when you approach them in a friendly, forceful, but not soapbox manner. This is not the time to argue your point, except very briefly. And you go to them when they're not on deadline. And you find that out by a few simple things. One way to get a lot more information, and I have some handouts here that I'd like to pass out. There are places in your town that will offer courses on how to deal with the media. Sometimes, in the case of here, Publicity Club of Chicago does it, WBBM Radio does it. There are a number of places that do this. And what you can do is get some tips on how the media operates. In the case of a daily newspaper, if in your town the newspaper publishes a morning paper, then the time to approach them is at a time when they're not on deadline, and that can be in the morning or early afternoon. If they are not so important if they're a feature writer, but if they are a city-side reporter, meaning they cover hard news or they are constantly assigned to something different. If the newspaper in your town is an afternoon paper, then approach them in the afternoon because along about right now, they're on. If it's a weekday, they're on deadline right now, and they haven't got time to talk to you. If you want to talk to a radio station, to a particular reporter, call and see when he might be available to call you back. If it's a talk show like Dave Baum's show here in Chicago, which Kate Burke was on the other night, call the producer. Say, I've got a story idea. Do you have a moment to listen now, or should I put it in a letter? And the more you take into account their interests and their time availability, the better off you are. If it's a television station, you want to talk to the assignment desk. And the earlier in the day you do that, the better off you are, regardless of when you think you might have a story. If you have an event like the rally that was on Law Day, you approach them a few days in advance. You don't approach them the day of, because then all they've got time to think about is, how am I going to fill up the 4:30 news, the 5 o'clock news? 10 o'clock news isn't so important because then that takes care of itself by whatever George Bush is doing or whatever stories are of continuing interest. The feature stories go on early. So if you're interested in approaching these people, you learn when they're available, you respect their time, and in the case of TV, the TV reporters and the TV assignment people and the TV producers will have one thing in common. They'll always sound rushed. They will always sound as if they haven't got time to talk to you, primarily because that's the situation that they're in. So you find out the right people to call, you write them a letter, you follow up at a certain time, and you listen to what they're telling you, and eventually you know. Pretty soon you get to learn that just because they talk very fast on the phone, and I got the release, and yeah, we think about this on the assignment, that doesn't mean anything. They're not turning you off necessarily. That's always the way they talk. Radio producers, reporters, they have a little more time at a certain time. And you can always say, is this a bad time? And they'll tell you, this is a bad time. Newspaper reporters, if they're not on deadline and if they're looking for stories, they'll listen to you a little bit more. And if they learn that you are somebody who respects their deadlines, knows how to approach them, wants to be a source, that's good. And someday they may come to you, and as Robin knows, a lot of this is spade work. A lot of times you go to them and you'll contact them judiciously for maybe 6 months, and they'll turn you off every time. And placing stories is a lot like being a professional baseball player. You know, guys like Andre Dawson are getting paid $2 million a year to fail 2/3 of the time and still are considered stars. It doesn't matter if you fail 10 times in a row on the subject, because you know the subject isn't going to go away. You're still going to be interested in it 6 months from now. Editors are still going to need stories 6 months from now. So you have to keep trying, and maybe the first breakthrough will be when somebody gets assigned by an editor, and editors are never friendly to reporters because they always want stories, they want them now, and they always have an implicit message about how come you can't come up with something different. So maybe the editor says there was a story here in Chicago where an adoptive couple refused to let one child, they'd given up one child, send it back. So they kept the one, and there's a huge battle going on between the state and this family over the right of one sibling to see another. And so, as Robin knows, there are editors at that point saying, this is a good story, I'm going to cover this story, and in addition to that, hey, Ignatz, you do something on what adoptive people and adoption groups, whatever they are, whoever they are, find those people and talk to them about this. So Ignatz is sitting there with his Rolodex, says, I don't know anybody in this field. Wait, somebody called me once, and they go through the Rolodex, and they find you, they call you up, and they say, what does this all mean? And that's, your foot is in the door with one person. And when you become a source, two things happen then. You got to be available, or you got to, if I'm not available, then I have Robin as my backup, and I say, I can't talk to you about it, love to talk to you about it, but I can't, but I've got this person, Robin Quinter, who works with me on this, she can talk to you just as well as I can, or vice versa. So you become credible, you become you're already a source, you're available, and when you talk your message, here comes the crucial thing. And I must say, with all due respect, I have a problem with the way people in the triad talk about adoption, and I'm 2/3 of the triad. I'm an adoptive parent, and I'm also an adoptee. You've got to be forceful in telling them what you're going to tell them. But you can't get on a soapbox, because your credibility starts to erode. You got 1,000 points you'd like to make about whatever the problem is in adoption. But you have to listen to what the reporter is asking you, because he's only interested in a certain few things, and he doesn't know anything about adoption, and he's desperate to get the story done on deadline. So you make your points, you make them forcefully, you don't stand on the soapbox, but you keep in mind, the back of your mind, that here's somebody who was interested once, go back another time and do it. Now let's say you get a call from a radio talk show. It says to Kate Burke, or to Robin, or to me, or to you, can you be with us at such and such a time to do a radio interview? Kate has done 2 interviews this week. One of them started at 12:30 in the morning and lasted, I understand, till 2:45. Now, then she did the Dave Baum show, and that was easy. That was from 10 to 11. So how badly do you want to do it? Are you willing to stay up until 1 o'clock in the morning on a talk show where, if it's a full moon, some of the people that call in, they're absolutely nuts. It doesn't matter what the...
Or 4 in the morning.
Or get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to be on Good Morning Weehawken, which starts at 6 o'clock, and they want you in the studio at 5, and by the way, when you get there, you find out they're going to put you on at 8:30. So how bad do you want to do it? If you don't do it once, they'll never come back to you. They'll never come back to you. Robin's been in the media. She's a reporter, an editor. I've been in the media. I guarantee you, you'll never get on again. When you do get that interview chance, then it's even more important that you stay cool, no matter, because you know the kind of questions you're going to get, and you got to be prepared for those. And the way you're prepared for them is that you have some member of your family who knows that if you yell at them, They won't take it personally on that, and they ask you all of the questions that you know you're going to get. If you go on to talk about why the need for open adoption, you're going to have people call in, maybe adoptive parents who are frightened, maybe people who are calling from a bar and, you know, they know somebody who's and they'll ask you the kind of questions they'll ask you. The MC wants an interesting show. He may ask you the kind of questions that are dynamite, the leading questions that start out, isn't it true that? I have heard that. Don't you think, or why do you? And one of the best questions to practice is, why, Mr. Martin, why do you want open records? Don't you realize, why do you want to break up families? Well, there's a good question. That's good for how many hours? You know, why, little questions like that. If the MC doesn't ask it, guarantee you that the person calling in will. Or adoption. You know, I knew somebody who was adopted, and he seemed perfectly normal and fine. And remember that most of the audience knows what adoption. I mean, they can define the word, and they sat next to somebody in third grade who was adopted, and that person didn't, you know, seem as normal as kids seem. So what's the problem? Okay, and you can't tell them what the problem is in a short time. So you're ready with your interviews. If it's a TV interview, that's the hardest of all to do. What does TV look for? They look for controversy. When we did this rally in Chicago, I can tell you what we worked on with my wife and I and Barb Gagne and some of the other truth seekers. Confrontation. We're going to go to the judge and we're going to confront the judge. I mean, that's the way you sell it to the media. Not we're going to storm his door because we got a permit. We told him he was there. We're going to come. And we sat down. We made nice with him. And I always make nice with people who have got armed deputy sheriffs around them. You know, it's always nice to be able to go home without posting bond. So
power of persuasion.
That's sure, you know, and they're very persuasive when they, you know, and all deputy sheriffs look alike. What do you want?
Especially when they're 6 feet, 400 pounds, and black.
And all of the above. So, but still, you sell the idea that we're going to have a rally, and we have an interesting cause. We're going to have confrontation. We're going to be visual. All of those things, visual. Oh, TV. What if I got I got a crew. I'll assign a crew over there. We're going to be articulate. Good. Radio reporter can, I can tell them that in 25 words or less what I'm going to do. So you set something up for them, and you go to them, and they come and cover what you're doing. And if you're on TV, you practice before you're on TV, be it a rally or a talk show. Here it is. You've got to be able to say everything you want to say in 60 seconds. So you practice that. Then you cut it down to 30. So that when I was on the Oprah Winfrey Show one time, and talk about intimidating presence, she comes up to me with the microphone and she says, "What do you want?" Just like that. And first thing I kept in mind was what Jane Pauley told one of my coworkers in an interview one time. I'm the star. People tune in to see me. So you play to that. I said to Oprah, so you cut it down. You get 1 point in, and hopefully your main opposition is right there. And hopefully he or she hasn't practiced, but you have. And you're ready with that 1 point. And if Oprah or the host of Good Morning Weehawken likes what you have to say, they'll come back to you. And while your opponent is getting all flustered, you're sitting there saying, point 1, point 2, point 3, no, we're not Rutgers, no, we're not this. Here's what we are. So you practice for the media, and it gets easier. And you get to know people more, they get to know you more. Pretty soon they call you up. My wife gets calls from media. I'd kill for at IBM to get publicity with the Associated Press. And every so often I'll say to her, "Hey, would you mention my name? You know all the media in this town. Tell them I exist too." So that's the main thing. There are people out there who want your story. There's never enough good stories. Robin knows that. Any reporter knows that. So you gotta play to it. Now, If there are questions, please ask, because I'm here to learn too. Yeah.
Well, this is actually just a comment. One of the pointers I got from a news director in Detroit was, and you mentioned it briefly too about the rally, is they almost want a package.
Yep.
You want to make the story for them. They want to write it in their way, but you want to let them know what the story is, what's going to be there, what's going to happen, why it is a story, why it's important, and what's going to make it interesting for their audience.
Right, absolutely. And they want to, and they got to be able to tell it maybe in 30 seconds. If you look at your watch, time some of these news stories that are on there, time the amount of time that they give to somebody who's stating his position. 30 seconds on TV is a lot of time. And remember, the ripple effect of that is far more than you'll ever know. Doesn't matter if it's the Evanston Review or the Milwaukee Journal or WJR in Detroit is a perfect example of a major station. At night, there are a couple. Kate Burke was heard in approximately 40 states because at night WGN is a clear channel station, 50,000 watts. So is WBBM. And the people that you're trying to reach are out there, and you'll never know it, but they are out there. It can be a 250 watt station. Somebody's there. And even more importantly, people at the station know that you're the person to call when there's something about adoption, because you're an expert. You're an expert.
And you talked about WJR, and you talked about cooperating with them and being available for them.
Absolutely.
I sat with a phone next to me for 4 hours last night. If the Tigers were rained out, we were going to be on WJR. And I canceled all my plans and said, okay, this is a possible appearance. If the Tigers cancel because of rain against the White Sox, they did beat the White Sox, by the way, we're on the air. We didn't go on the air. But the thing is, she was a fill-in. She said, I usually fill in for Warren Pierce, as a guy that does a daytime show. As soon as I get an availability from him, you guys are the first one that's on. So by making that sacrifice, we'll get another chance to
Absolutely.
have a shot at a major station.
That's right. And then you write a follow-up note saying, hey, thanks, it was great to be on the show. Please call me anytime. If they don't put you on, you still write to them and say, hey, I was glad to come down there. It's fascinating to sit in a stuffy room for 4 hours. In fact, I always wondered, which way the tapes moved, so that they know that you know that this is the nature of the media. That maybe this game would have been rained out, and then the producer sitting there with nothing to do, and but I've got my interview. So if it takes to be on at midnight, 5 o'clock in the morning to get up, how bad do you want to do it? Obviously you want to. The story is important enough, and maybe your opponent won't get up. Always find an opponent, I love to debate with Bill Pearson, because they're always going backwards. You can go forward. The Bill Pierces of the world, they're going backward. And just like me, they're getting older, and they won't be around forever. But some of the movement will, and they can't keep defending forever. They can't. It gets tiresome being on the defensive all the time. Whereas you can attack. Yeah.
Just one thing I discovered at this conference, among all the other hundreds of things, but apparently your visuals must be pretty important too, because John Goldberg told me that one of my little buttons that I created, the one with the adoption agency file drawer, was the focus for the story in the Detroit station, was it? That they start out with your camera on that button and then a pullback. Now, I never would have dreamed that my
Absolutely.
little adoption agency file drawer button would make
They've
it.
got.
I love
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Sure.
I do too.
The-
My husband was some interviews, and then after we were all finished, they put their camera away. The reporter was so friendly, and so I said, "Oh, you might want to see a picture of my birth family and I." And so I showed him a picture, and they whipped out their camera. They said, "Oh,
Good visual.
Absolutely.
There's a CNN interview from about 5 or 6 years ago that starts out with my family album, which is almost embarrassing, but with all these pictures of my parents and me when I was like in the early 50s, and then my birth mother holding me, which is the one picture that I have of her doing that when I was about 4 months old. And that was, that's how they started this whole feature story. Yeah, they love that stuff.
Sure.
The visuals,
Take the
in the
picture.
rallies that were around the country, because I can tell people are straining. Come on. Thank you. Yeah, I can tell. In the rally. rallies that went on all over the country, the picket signs were picked up very, very well. In some of the television things, bright fluorescent cardboard. AAC has changed its colors, if you haven't noticed, in its publications to red and black and white, which are the three most attractive, attention-grabbing colors that there are. We had a lot of fluorescent cardboard. We had a lot of signs like sealed records keep me from my sister, born on such and such a date. That gives you a political message, gives search information, which is another purpose that we all have as a secondary purpose, but it's a use that we do have in getting some of those signs out. One other thing I want to touch on that Leo mentioned is the getting your word out, and the new revolution that's occurred in the media as well is the fax machine. And it's almost gotten to the point where, to some extent, it's good to send out a press release in advance. But 2 or 3 days before any event, the day before, you fax stuff. If you can get a list of fax numbers, and you may have to acquire them over a period of time. But I guess on Tuesday morning, before I left Washington to fly out here, Monday night I went down and sent out about 25, 30 faxes to the major media about this conference, about the Thursday reunion that we had, and had them faxed all over the country. And sure enough, we have gotten inquiries as a result of that. Associated Press ran a story on Thursday afternoon on the National Wire about the conference, and Good Morning America was here for the reunion. They didn't use their stuff, but they're here. They know that we're here. That is almost as good as getting it on the air. A lot of this work is all investment. You will send out releases, you will send out overtures to the press for months, for years even, before all of a sudden they pick up and notice, hey, these people are here. We in Washington, we send out, just about every month, we send out press releases announcing our support group meetings. And we send out about 260 of them every month. And most of them, I'm sure, go in trash cans. Sometimes they make it into a community calendar announcement or something like that. But all of a sudden, something will come up with an adoption-related case, an adoption-related piece of legislation, and sure enough, they will be calling us to respond. All of a sudden, there's somebody sick at a TV or a radio talk show host is sick, the substitute's looking for a fill-in story, and bingo. That's how you get your attention, and that's how you get it across. Any media that you can use, any show, any broadcast, any publication is worth your time to do it. Even if it is the lousiest paper, the crappiest show, somebody still reads it. The fact that it exists means that it is still either profitable or it's still in operation and going to be discontinued shortly, but it is still in existence and people read it, people view it. I have even done, I almost don't want to admit this, for AAC, the public affairs programming on Home Shopping Network. And I'll tell you, you find out who your friends are and their viewing habits when they see you on Home Shopping Network. So,
When everybody comes.
I saw you on TV the other night. You know you were on it. Yeah.
We've been doing a lot of local cable in Detroit,
Yeah.
which is a good chance to get experienced in television too. And I also produce in it, and a lot of people talk about, gosh, I hope no one, I hope I look well and all that stuff. My favorite joke for the people that are on the show is, don't worry, nobody watches it. And a lot of times no one does, but it gives the participants the experience of being on television. And our president was on one show, and he came into work the next day, and one of his coworkers said, yeah, I saw you on TV last night. He says, well, how'd you like it? He says, I didn't watch it. I was flipping through the channels, and I saw you on TV.
That's exactly right.
But they saw him.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then he could tell them why he was on. And it just starts to get the word out and gets people experience being on television.
And when you go on TV, dress your best, look your best, minimum of jewelry. First thing I do when I am on is take this watch off because it reflects so much, and they'll distract. The viewers are easily distracted, and they form an immediate impression of you. So that, and if all they're concentrating on is, the pendant or the watch, or boy, I wonder if that's a Rolex. That 30 seconds that you're on trying to give your message, that you're lost to to those people?
There are a few guidelines for anybody who's doing a TV appearance that we did put in the Open My Records Day books. And in a nutshell, don't wear stripes, watch your jewelry, wear a little bit more makeup than you would normally wear, and put a heavy dusting of powder. And that extends to gentlemen who have what we call expanding foreheads as well, with a dusting of powder. The shine is something that the camera picks up enormously and can be very distracting. Eyeglasses are something else. Sunglasses, if they're the kind that are removable, take them off. Anybody behind sunglasses, even in an indoor or an outdoor setting on camera, looks shady and distrustful. That's an image that's created. If you have eyeglasses that are clear, or very, very slightly tinted, depending upon the lighting and the situation, you may want to remove them just for the sake of being interviewed. Just a few guidelines. Watch how you sit on TV and don't squirm in your seat. That really is body language that's very noticeable. Just a few things, and most of them are contained in that Open My Records Day packet. Radio interviews are my favorite because you can sit in your bathrobe with no makeup on. Nobody cares what the hell you look like as long as you sound good. Now, as far as a couple of things I want to show, I want to point out a couple of things. One, AAC has, I had about 300 of these sample press releases to promote individuals' conference participation. Some of them have disappeared, but most of them have been taken. They're on the registration table. If you did not get one and would like one, I'm going to see if I can get some more run off today. I do have one up here with some samples. The sample thing. It's easily used as a model. You can basically take out the fictitious name that I used in it, insert your name, insert the correct information about you, and let it go at that. It's very simple. We have found a strategy, and this is a strategy I'll share with you about the March to Heal that we have continued to use with the communications department for the AAC. That is, we expected publicity during the March corridor, in that corridor of activity, New York to Washington, Route 1, that community, those cities, those papers where we had activities and events going on. What we were trying to achieve as well was publicity in other parts of the country. And it's real hard to promote an event in Chicago that's occurring somewhere else. What we focused on were the local participants from, say, the Chicago area, from Milwaukee, from Cincinnati. Cincinnati's a perfect example. I knew one woman from Cincinnati who was attending the Speak Out and Rally on the Saturday at the end of the march. What we did was, for people that we knew who they were and we knew that they intended to attend, we sent them a form, a press release information form. We asked them to fill it out, particular information. I used that information to draft a press release about their participation. They were all identical except for the names, the ages, the affiliations. I made up a quote for each one based on some remarks that I'd asked them to make in this form, and circulated it to their local media. They provided me with the names and addresses of the TV, the radio, the newspaper stations, that kind of stuff. Cincinnati's a perfect example. We had a birth mother from Cincinnati who was just delightful. Filled out all of her information. I submitted this press release to the Cincinnati Enquirer as well as a number of other places. The Enquirer decided to pick up on this. This was kind of neat. It was different. Here's a local angle. I am spoon-feeding them a local angle to a national event. That was my intention. I gave them that bait. They took it. They had a feature article the day before the march, that Friday, in their style section with a photograph of this birth mother that was just delightful. Now, 9 features out of 10 that we see done, for instance, this reunion the other day, they focus on the nice, positive, warm, fuzzy stuff going on. The reunion, the emotions that are running high, how wonderful all of this is. Everybody has a nice, warm feeling after watching this on the news or reading it in the paper. What often gets lost is what we are trying to sell, and that is our political message, that sealed records are harmful, sealed records keep this information from people. It's very difficult because you cannot control the media to keep any story, any broadcast from being a warm, fuzzy feature with no hard political reality of our message in it. Let me, hang on a second with this. I just want to show you something. Trip. Did anybody see the two stories that ran in this? Here's the Trib, here's the Trib, and here's the Sun-Times. Perfect example of what I'm trying to say. The headline on the Tribune, which was not written by the reporter, 40 years after adoption, sister finds her family. About the fourth paragraph, their emotion-packed reunion at the American Adoption Congress's conference was held to prove a point. In the view of AAC members, adoption records should be open to family members who want to find each other. Now that's high up in the story. That's a good way of putting it. That capitalizes on a warm, fuzzy, featurey event and still gets our political message out. So if you want to pass it around, I just want to have it back. Even better, I don't know if you can see this, but the headline, Closed Adoption Records Delay Reunion by 40 Years. That is perfect. That's the best headline I've seen on one of our stories yet. That gets the political message right out there with the warm fuzzies. And of course, it's about the fourth or fifth paragraph. The emotional reunion at the Chicago O'Hare Marriott was meant to highlight the battle being waged by the American Adoption Congress for legislation to open adoption records in 47 of the 50 states. You walk a very, very, very thin line when you promote reunion stories, when you promote a search story, how wonderful it was to finally overcome these obstacles. What I have found out in the last 2 years of doing this is that the public's perception of our cause is that we don't have a reason for needing these records open because people can find anyway. There is a backlash to promoting these events, these warm feature articles, if you cannot get the hard reality of the political message across. The television coverage of the Thursday's reunion is a perfect example. 5 stations from Chicago were here. I only saw 4 of the broadcasts. One of them was about 30 seconds of the reunion, no mention of AAC, nothing. One of them was about 30 seconds of the reunion. They cut from the film footage and the anchor person says, the reunion was brought about by the American Adoption Congress. Okay, it's better than nothing. The other 2 were marvelous. They brought in the political, they were both longer pieces, and they brought in the political message, the closed records message. One of them used an interview with Kate and a film clip with Kate Burke, and another one just delved on it and took on the message, the quote that the adoptee who was reunited, Kathy, said about how they discriminate and how it denies her civil rights. That's the kind of message we want to get out. Any of you who are not comfortable in making sure that there is a connection between a nice featurey article, a nice featurey story about a reunion or a search, and the political reality that the closed records keep us from doing this more frequently, we don't need the extra warm publicity. It is at the point now where it's hurting our cause. We have to have that connection made because the public perception is just too important. We are a minority group in this country, which means that the majority of people in this country are not affected by adoption. We are not going to achieve the changes that we want without assistance and support from the majority. And if they perceive that we don't need this information, that we have abilities to search and find anyway, we can't afford to take that chance. We can't afford to have that perception with the public. So that's one message I want to make very strongly to all of you. One of the other things that I brought were some sample press releases. Again from Thursday's event, again from also the conference, one of the advanced press releases that we wrote a couple of months ago about the conference. I'm not sure if I have enough copies for everybody, but you can certainly pass them around and look at them. Leo's guidelines for writing press releases are excellent, and I think you need to keep in mind some what were called news pegs that you can use to especially promote adoption-related stories. Mother's Day, Father's Day, these kinds of occasions, the timeliness of them are always important. If there is some kind of family-oriented event, every year in Washington, D.C., there is a Black Family Reunion Day down at the mall, and they have thousands and thousands of families that get together for these huge reunions. We have attempted over the years to capitalize on that one. They've never picked up on it yet, but if there's something like that in your community, that's something to consider. National Adoption Week, which is one of the bones in my side, has always been the week of Thanksgiving. That's because we're all so thankful.
For what, that we were adopted or that we
Who
served?
knows? It always galls me, the publicity that is just always so overwhelmingly syrupy positive about adoption, how wonderful it is, and during that particular week. That's a week when generally sentiment is feeling pretty good. I mean, it's holiday time coming, this kind of thing. And basically, I see no reason why we can't see that spotlight shift a bit. With some effort, see our movement, our search groups, our individual members promote, look, here's a slightly different way of publicizing, a slightly different story for you to run during National Adoption Week. That's been successful in a couple of times when it's been tried. That's another example, that last week in November with a little bit of thought. A little bit of advanced planning can be very useful. National Adoption Week, Mother's Day, Father's Day, any family-oriented holiday, New Year's Day. This is how we're going to kick off the new year. Sometimes you have to manufacture a connection, but sometimes it can be very useful. We manufactured the connection with all this patriotic stuff with the march last year. We had Let Freedom Ring ceremonies in Philadelphia. We had all of this great emancipator references at the rally at the mall and in the grounds of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, because they were ties that were easily made because of the setting that we were in. You can easily make those kinds of ties with holidays as well. Anybody have any questions? Martin, you had your hand up.
Yeah, you mentioned it. During National Adoption Week, several years back, I had a letter to the editor published in the San Mateo Times and the San Francisco Chronicle, which started with this week being National Adoption Week. Let us not forget, the time.
We've been talking up till now about news coverage. That is coverage on your 6 o'clock news, on the A section, on the metro section of your newspaper, the style or the lifestyle or the tempo, the accent, whatever sections. I would say the next area I wanted to get into is how we can use the opinion pages, the op-ed pages, things of that nature. Letters to the editor. Anybody looks at the morning paper, go through the A section, and you'll find a lot of the A section is devoted to the news stories, what's going on in the Near East, the Far East, the States, whatever. Then you get to the last couple pages, and you'll see the paper's statements, their opinions, their editorials about particular current issues, and they're always accompanied by letters to the editor. Letters to the editor, a large paper like the Chicago Tribune, the Washington Post, gets thousands of them. And to get a letter to the editor in, it's going to be well read, and it's going to be very noticed. Your smaller papers, and believe me, I've worked for enough of them to know that they struggle if they don't have a couple of good letters in each week. Like, who can we get to write a letter this week? Can I make some outrageous statement and get a letter in? They sometimes are really struggling. Again, using a peg, such as National Adoption Week, Mother's Day, Father's Day, those kinds of letters carry a little bit more weight in their attempts to get them published. Anytime the mood strikes you, they carry an attempt to get it. They will. Chances are the smaller the medium, the better your chances of getting it in. One thing though, the larger papers usually keep a tally of the letters that they receive. So if you send one as Joe Blow, and 2 weeks later you send another one, and another one, and another one, they put, every time they enter an entry, a letter received from Joe Blow, you get another mark by your name, because they keep a tally. So if you write on the topic of adoption, and you write them 16 letters, when you send in the 17th, they're not really going to take it too seriously. The better suggestion is if you're within a search group or a support group, and this is the major papers, the big ones. You have a search and support group, something like that, get the viewpoints in, get them under different signatures. Because of that, that sometimes works against you. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I keep up with a couple letters I wrote in response to other stories. You could, every time the word adoption comes up in a headline or a story, then you send a letter to try to get your different point of view across. I began literally corresponding with the editor on the subject of adoption. And they do keep tally, but for example, there's one local resident in my community. He's like every week he's, talking about anti-communism and bombing the world or something. And they always print his letter, so.
It's probably the editor's father-in-law.
Yeah, I demanded equal time for adoption under anti-communism.
One thing, when you see a pattern emerging in your newspaper, in your community, sometimes it serves you well to look at what's behind that. And an example is the Washington Post, which has traditionally been very, very anti any adoption reform efforts. Bill Pierce's letter, now I'm from there, I deal with Bill Pierce on a day-to-day basis. He's in my backyard. So I'm very accustomed to dealing with him and Mary Beth and Jeffrey. Every time an adoption issue comes up, a letter from one of them representing a little bit of research work and a couple of friends who work down there to fill me in that the assistant editor of the editorial page happens to be the treasurer of the National Committee for Adoption. And his wife sits on the board of the Edna Gladney Home. Now, if any of you don't know to whom we're referring, the NCFA is our opposition. It is a loosely based organization of about 120 member adoption agencies with, supposedly they've been well funded in the past, although we've heard they're in financial hardships, which does not bother me in the slightest. But they are our opposition. They purport to represent adoption interests throughout the country. They have an established credibility because they have paid staff, they have articulate people who can speak on occasion, and they are a very fancy schmancy title that makes them feel that way. That I had to figure out what the connection was between the Post and NCFA before I figured out why these letters consistently got in. Now, when that deputy editorial page editor took another job and I read the announcement, I was real excited about it too. But that's just something that sometimes you have to recognize when you see a particular bias coming up. Yeah.
We did this, and I would like to know your opinion on it. I don't know if it's really legitimate to do it. But in Louisville, we had a talk show, radio talk show on Sunday morning, and we knew it was coming up. So each of the members, our leader was the one that was being interviewed and was being approached by the question. And each of us members had different questions.
Oh, you plan to call in?
Right, and
Sure.
we did this, and so that, when you had a nut call, then you had one of us that was trying to get, where she would have to answer that question and get that point across, where it wouldn't be stuck on the same thing. And is that a legitimate way of doing something?
Sure.
like that?
If you want to tip off people that you're going to be on the radio and you'd appreciate a few sympathetic calls, that's excellent. It just supports your point of view. However, I'll tell you something. It depends on the market, but in all the talk shows, Kate and I have done probably 300 talk shows this year, in the last 12 months at least. And one thing that comes in very, very clearly is not only is there public ignorance about what we're doing and why we want to do it, but generally public sentiment is in our favor. I mean, I got up at 4 in the morning to do a talk show in Denver from my home. And it's an all-night show, and it's, only some very strange people are listening. And we got a bunch of calls, and my best one was, "Hi, I'm Jerry, a trucker. I'm going through Golden. I've been listening to y'all all night. And I don't have any relation to adoption, except I remember my aunt once gave up a baby, and she wondered about that kid for years. I can really sympathize with what your guest is talking about. Thank you." Click.
That's right. And there are Jerrys out there all over the place, and they've got credibility because there are a lot of people
Right.
they're saying, they identify with him, they identify with his sister's problem. Why should she have to suffer like that? Those people are just, it's just as well, he might as well have been on
Right.
that talk show as a panelist. The credibility is what you need, and so, you know, and Robin sent Jerry $50 to thank him for coming on the show, and as they had planned before, but it's important. It's important.
No, it was not set up. It was totally a, you know, guy driving down Interstate 70 or whatever. But you generally will see there are always a few opponents, there are always a few supporters that you don't know about. And two things, just saying, Sherry, two things that I do want to caution you on doing any kind of show like this. Number one, be careful about details on any kind of search help or any kind of search work that you do. Excuse me. There are avenues of search that we all use, we all know about them, and we sure don't want them publicized. I have encouraged people, I'll give you an example. In Virginia, we have a way of pulling birth names out of old indexes of court orders. It's not real well known. There's a specific technique to it of cross-referencing that very few of us know how to do. The court doesn't know we have caught on. We don't want them to know we have caught on to this. So when somebody may make a, well, how did you do this? How did you get this name? I encourage people to deflect that with, you know, it was so hard, it was so difficult, I really wanted to find my parents. I looked for 14 months, it was up and down, I went through public records, I went through marriage records, I went through, you know, divorce records, I went through driver's licenses, I went through the newspapers, I went through city directories, da-dum, 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 da-dum. Hit them with a quantity of what you have done, how much work you've done, rather than specific details about what you did. We all need to preserve our sources and our techniques so that we can help other people. We do not need to make them too public. The second thing is, try to avoid tangling up the issue of open adoption records with other issues that come up. Most frequently, open adoption, I mean, it's one word short of our issue. And oftentimes, people do not realize the difference between open adoption, the current contemporary practice of placement in homes where there's ongoing contact between birth and adoptive families, and open adoption records. You're talking to people in the general public, you're talking to a moderator, a reporter, a host, whoever, who probably does not know too much about adoption. And consequently, they are going to fall into the same trap. They're similar terms, they're easily mixed up. The other big one that we often get tied into is abortion. And boy, if you mention that word on a talk show, those phones light up. I have had people call in trying to draw adoption issues into the abortion issue. No matter what anybody's personal feelings are on the subject of abortion, any discussion of it is only going to detract from the message we are trying to send across. And I have had to say on occasion, you know, that's another whole topic, it's probably worth another whole show. Please, you know, I think, you know, we need to devote some time and effort to discussing this. I don't see that they're really strongly related between the two. Thank you for calling. Try to get out of that particular bailiwick. Sherry, you had a question?
Yes, I had an opportunity to be on news television 2 years ago. It was right around Mother's Day. And 15 of us had that same opportunity. Only 3 of us was chosen, and I was one of them. And I prepared what I was going to say. And they said, use your emotions. And all I could do was think about the child I never found. And of course I cried. But the one I used that got me on was I said, is my child in the same situation as Lisa Steinberg? I got on, so I was one of the, I was on the 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock news, I think it was Channel 9, 3 days during the week, all week before Mother's Day, people all over the country called and oh, I didn't know that was also an easy way.
One thing that we have found very interestingly is that oftentimes a lot of people are either intimidated by what they feel is the level of articulation or expertise that they have to have, or second, they're just not willing to come that far out of the closet for the public. I'm glad you were able to do that, even if it surprised a few friends and relatives.
So 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity of being on Joan Rivers. Marcia Regan asked Sherry, we'd like you to be a spokesman, please. But I decided that I could do a lot of work behind, and my husband asked me to please not bring the notoriety onto the family at this time. And I'm preparing my family for my eventuality.
Your eventual debut out of the closet entirely.
So
Yeah.
although I went on TV, I still, Joan Rivers is a little bit more visibility than Caroline News.
There are a variety of things you have to watch, and one thing is that, one thing we should cover is that when someone wants to be part of a story as a birth parent, an adoptee, an adoptive parent, but they don't want their name used, they don't want their face on TV, they want them, with a bag over their head or the shadows or whatever. That is something that, unless you have absolutely no way around it, not to use.
Because it takes away.
Because anything less than a full-blown identity, identified person, takes away your credibility. Pat?
Be prepared to give your age.
Yes, be prepared to give your age. And I get all those comments when I send out my forms asking for people's age, and people say, why? What does it matter? And it does. If I am able to say Leo Martin, 45, an adoptee, it shows that it's a subliminal message, but it shows whoever's reading that press release, he is a mature person, or at least ostensibly a mature person.
He's not a baby
No,
That's right.
Oh, yes, he is.
He is a mature person, an adult with well-formed ideas, etc. At the same time, if you're looking at someone who's an extremely articulate, mature person and they're 18, you may want to not use their age, because that may work against them.
Be careful in your group if you quickly, already who you would put on radio, talk show, or TV, or have interviewed by a publication, and those people in your group that you would not want to. Be very careful about who you choose as the spokesperson, because that's your one shot at it, and all it takes is the reporter will have his bias already. The headline writer will slant it a certain way. If the person that you use comes off as having an axe to grind, the message that Robin has been stressing will get lost, and it'll be a turnoff not only for the audience but maybe for that publication. So that you may step on some people's feelings who say, how come I can't speak? I've got a good story. And you got to figure out a way, without telling that person, unless you absolutely have to, that, hey, we don't want to use you.
Sometimes the
You
more
just come across too
militant
strong.
stance does not work in your favor.
No, this is, you don't want to drop the A-bomb on Luxembourg on these. You've got to find somebody who can get the message across in a net form. And, we're all angry about this thing. We can all go from 0 to 60 in a hurry. But if you only got one shot at the Minneapolis Star-Tribune or the Denver Post, you got to go with a person that will win the audience and will get you maybe a second interview. One other thing too, if there's an outlet in your town, like a TV station like WGN Television here in Chicago, wouldn't know a news story if the Russians march up Michigan Avenue. I can guarantee you'll hear it last in WGN. I used to work there and write the news. I can guarantee you they don't know what they're talking about, and that was 30 years ago. So, but they've got one thing going for them, other than Bozo Circus, and that is that they're superstation. So if by some miracle they choose to run something on adoption on the station, and they did after the rally, and they did the other night, it goes to all of their subscribing cable systems. So even if you feel that they couldn't find a story with both hands on a daily basis, you still curry their favor, because if you put you on, cable systems that are picked up by WGN or others will do it. Also, even if you get on a station and your story doesn't run, it's not the end of it. Each of the networks have, they call it different things, but one of them is called the daily electronic feed, and that is the stories that are not used by that station or by the network. If you, like Good Morning America didn't use that, but they make all of these tapes available to their affiliates and to other stations, and sometimes you'll see a CNN logo on your station, and that's because they have the right in that market to pick up stories from from Cable News Network. So don't despair if you only get on, if they only use this much, because that much may still go regionally, or in the case of WGN, it'll go to Alaska and down to Latin America. So it's, somebody sees it, and somebody is influenced by it. Yes,
I was going to say
yeah.
that we get WGN in Kentucky. Now, that consists of Bullock County, all of Jefferson County, and Oldham County. So that's, you're talking about maybe 40 miles by 40 miles. And the other day, they were talking about how many people in the area had basic, just basic cable.
Cables.
Not HBO or anything.
Sure.
And it was something like 200,000 homes.
That's right, and every one of those homes knows,
WGN.
that's right, and has somebody that they know they ought to tell, at least 100,000 of those homes, the decision is made right there, I ought to tell so-and-so what I just saw, because she or he ought to know about
Yeah.
what I just saw. Yes?
One small suggestion that I think any search group could use, we sent the brochures from our local search group, the AAC, CUB, and the Soundex, uninvited to the action editor. And quite coincidentally, they got a query in from outside the state about 6 weeks later. And they have the information there already to know how to answer that. And we got a nice long article about searching and a lot of information out of Emma's brochure. And then a couple of weeks later, they did another one.
Sure. You know what's a deadly time, and Robin's been through this too, this 3-day weekends, or even worse, 4-day weekends, are a deadly time for reporters.
Any dead time when the official world, when the business world, the government world is off, newspaper and assignment editors are struggling for stories.
Sure.
And that if you are going to stage a reunion, if you're going to do something of that sort, a special event, a conference, if you can work it to suit your convenience as well, those kinds of time frames, particularly that Thanksgiving week, those 4 days of Thanksgiving are deadly. I used to be an editor for a wire service. I hated those weeks. I may have off, but my wire service didn't have off. And I had to fill it with something, and there were no court cases, there were no news coming in whatsoever. That's the kind of time you can hit up. Listen, I want to pass around a few things so people have time to look at them, and I want to show a couple of good, what I think are good videos. Half of the front page of the May 4th San Jose, California Post-Record is devoted to National Open My Records Day with a photograph. They had about 40 or 50 people at the San Jose rally. I think they actually had a little more than that. And I think you'll find that one pretty interesting. Stu, you want to take that top one?
Should we be sending you out?
I would love to see, I collect the clippings. You all will get the annual report of the AAC tomorrow at breakfast, and I use them. I reproduce some of them in the report to show the kinds of coverage we've been getting. So I always love to get them.
You might also, excuse me, Rob, you might also want to, when you get home, look at the newspapers from starting Friday to see if the Associated Press, the story,
Right.
the AP moved.
The wire services ones, we have a hard time getting them because they move and your local paper may use it, but we don't know that. We never know.
And the AP has, I don't know how many hundreds of subscribers they have around the country, but if you see that story, look at how it was played, look at how the headline was written, because those are two different people doing it. And if you see them, send them in to Robin, and if you wouldn't mind, send them to Barb Gagnon, if you happen to be here, member of Truth Series. We won't see that story in Chicago because the papers here won't pick up stories out of there from the local
Here's a
wires.
couple others from Open My Records Day. This one ran on the Metro page of the Washington Times with a big colored photo. And here's one at the very bottom of the Baltimore Sun. Now, a good example here, one thing you have to recognize is what else happens on the day that you are doing something. And I swear on Thursday we were waiting for a plane to crash. I'm sorry to sound macabre about that. The day that the march left from New York City, we had the networks there for the kickoff of the march. And I'm turning on my 4 o'clock news looking for CBS's feed, and all I see is some jetliner landing, coming apart in a field in Iowa. And all my heart goes out with the crisis that those people are going through now. At the same time, you have to look at what your competing interests, the competing news of the day. If I think in California to announce their bill in the legislature They found out they had their press conference scheduled for the same day that the governor was going to sanction the execution of the first guy out there in 20 years. I said, you might consider changing the time of that. You're not going to have any press coverage. They're going to be camped out at the governor's office waiting for a pardon or whatever. And if those who aren't there are going to be down at San Quentin. Yeah.
We have trouble getting our PSAs. Besides just following it.
Okay, PSAs are somewhat of I learned this by screwing it up myself. Do you have the ones that were produced in New York that people use?
Yes.
One thing we discovered was that there are always boards to meet with, there are always letters. If you do not have your own 501c3 tax-exempt IRS status, you're going to be screwed because you're not going to get them all. You're not a charitable organization. Okay. It sometimes is as simple as they'll run it once and then pitch it. You have to make the request that they put it on the master tape, their own master tape. They will not, when they need a 30-second PSA, they will not go to the bin and look through them all and pull yours out. They have a master tape of 30-second PSAs. If you ask them to put it on that, your chances of getting it on are better. What happens is that is on an auxiliary roll, or whatever you call it. I'm off on the technology. It's on an auxiliary roll. If they need a 30-second PSA, they switch to that roll and it's the next one up. It's sometimes very difficult to ensure that you'll get them on. If you watch TV at 4 o'clock in the morning on, channel 32, chances are you may see it. But it's very difficult to do. That's all I can tell you, is that you just have to stay on them.
I wouldn't
Have to
hesitate,
learn their system of doing things.
and I wouldn't hesitate either to make an appointment to see the whatever they call the person, program
Program
manager,
director.
or community affairs or whatever, and
Talking to them many times, they do, they keep turning them over.
Yeah,
and over.
that's
Yeah,
right.
that is, I mean, we're looking at positions. Okay, we're looking at people in positions that have very frequent turnover.
Right.
We worked with somebody for about 6 months at one station who was very supportive, very helpful and cordial about what we were doing. Her successor was a pain in the butt. That's the way they are.
It's not covered, we can try to get it. Oh, I won't.
Yeah,
How long
don't
is
give
it-
up on it.
What do you do when, I know that people that I work with that I correspond with from Houston area, that the anchor person for their station that they've never been able to get a story on, where they've got it on other stations, is a Gladney aunt. Is there any way you can combat that?
She's an adopted mother,
Oh, adopted mother? Whatever.
gladly adopted mother.
Okay.
Well,
whatever.
sometimes you have to accept the fact that there may be barriers you cannot get over.
There's no way
You cannot overcome. And what you do is compensate for that barrier and step up your efforts with a different station.
Yeah.
She does
Let
a
'em
lot
know,
of
too.
community service, and her little 2-year-old always appears with her at the golf tournament, at the charity organization, whatever. And it's like she's a living Gladney commercial. They did a tape, they showed her getting the baby at Gladney. The day she went up, the film crew went up, and the baby was there, and she was crying, and she's an excellent reporter.
That's not the one where Gladney made the collect phone call to those adopted parents. Is it on national television?
No,
Did that
no.
show?
She's a very attractive woman, she's very articulate, and she comes across real
Go
well.
to the competition,
Yeah,
and if
go
you
to the competition.
and if you ever have a chance to talk to meet with anybody from the news director or assignment people at the station, flat out tell them, we don't come to you with these stories because we feel that so and so is biased. And I can tell you one thing: if you can ever do it, this is a Houston market.
Yep.
If you can ever find somebody who's coming to town who you, by some stretch of the imagination, you feel has big name recognition, is sympathetic to the adoption. A couple of years ago, I had the occasion to talk to Alex Haley. Couldn't afford him for one of these meetings, but he is pro open records. I mean, who's more for searching groups? Supposing you were able to, it might take a year from now, 2 years from now, you have somebody with big name recognition, you think is sympathetic to the cause, is willing to talk to your group, you go to the competition with that story, you offer them an exclusive, and you tell the competition, I'll come to you because I think you're open-minded, as opposed to KTRK or whatever the station is in Houston, and stick it to them that way. If you do something that, hey, how come we didn't have this story? Hey, I'm sorry, I can't go to you. Your anchor person there she shuts us off.
Well, we've also had newspaper reporters or editors, I'm not sure which, it wasn't me directly, but I've heard, just refused to do a story on our various groups because of personal.
Sure, maybe
Yes,
the
but
publisher.
You gotta
is,
understand,
an adopted parent.
newspapers and TV stations and radio stations are people too. I mean, we have homes, we have crises, we have laundry, you name it. Basically, our personal biases come into stories in somewhat subliminal ways when it's carefully editorialized or not when it's carefully edited and there's a lot of control. In a high market with a high visibility personality, such as the woman you described, they're going to let her have her way to a point, as long as it's not patently or blatantly unethical. So far she hasn't. It may be tasteless to you, but unfortunately it's probably not going to be something that you're able to overcome.
They also get a tremendous amount of gladness. She gets a tremendous amount of free press in Houston due to all the huge annual charitable galas given by the old wealthy rich.
Money talks,
You bet.
and we
Money
don't have
talks.
it. And
Our movement does not have it. And that's all I can
It's hard
say.
to
Yeah.
take when you're sitting, you know.
That's right.
Well, I know that this is Saturday. Last Thursday night, a little over a week ago, the National Committee for Adoption had their annual fundraising gala dinner in the Departmental Auditorium in Washington, D.C. It was a little bit nauseating. I'm very glad I did not go. I would have loved to be a fly on the wall in a dress, in a tuxedo, whatever, but I was not going to pay the money. But it's real hard. They have a, I have to admit, I mean, I get jokes about it that I'm kind of obsessed with the National Committee because they're in my backyard. I know exactly who's on their board of directors. I know Meryl Streep does a bunch of public service stuff for them. She's on their honorary board of trustees. I will not go to a Meryl Streep movie. That's my personal,
I have a close
you know.
friend in Houston who's all three sides of the triad. She's also a Gladney birth mother and a Gladney adopted mother. She gets the adopted parent publications from Gladney, and they were having, sending out invitations or something to a benefit, the benefit for the National Committee. Their contribution range went from $50,000 to $500. There was no space on there for any amount regularly accepted.
right,
It was down to $500.
right, 500 was about the
And they
minimum.
gave them name categories like Angel.
Yeah, you gotta husband your resources and fight those battles that you can fight. For those of you from Chicago, know that in many parts of the Chicago area and elsewhere, the cradle is God. I mean, you might as well attack the church as attack the cradle. And you have to find ways around that. You can't go head on with them. You can't win those battles in certain places, and you have to husband your resources, emotional as well as financial.
The only way around things like that are to continually come up with interesting alternative stories. And eventually you'll find they're not interested in search and reunion stories. We cover all those. I hear that all the time now. But that's just something you have to, find some kind of quirk. We were very fortunate with this reunion the other day that it had a Chicago angle and had all these people for 40 years who've been separated for that amount of time. That was an interesting enough angle. It got them all out here. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. When you're planning any special event, like the reunion the other day, like the rally at the mall, like National Open My Records Day. Incidentally, we're doing another National Open My Records Day next May 1st. So you have plenty of advance notice. We expect a lot of publicity about it, and we expect a lot of cooperation from all you guys about it. A press kit is essential. What I was able to do with some of those reporters who were very rushed, I discovered Dan Quayle was landing over at the airport at 12 noon. Our reunion was at 12 noon. A number of them came in a little on the late side, trying to be two places at once. They missed the big moment, so we had to do a little staging, a little creative hugging and kissing. That's okay. But they don't have a lot of time. They have time when they're back in the car on the freeway or in the traffic jam trying to get back to the station to read something. This is a press kit. It's a folder. It has pertinent information put out in it. I only have 2 of them left, so I do want them back. But it gives you an example of the kind of media paperwork, background information about the AAC, background information about this conference, another copy of the press release on this particular event going on, those kinds of things in a handy-dandy, easy-to-carry, easily recognizable form. So that's something to think about in anticipation of any major event that you cover. I want to show you two TV interviews. The first one is the coverage of last summer's March to Heal when it came through Philadelphia. And I think it's an excellently done story. I think you'll probably agree it's one of the best TV stories I've seen.
The Department of Environmental Resources says the waste came from Lancaster.
First off, you have to look at Philadelphia's garbage problem.
Discovery has left people in the community angry.
Turn the volume
Put the
on.
microphone by the speaker.
There's a speaker on it.
It's hospital waste. Now,
Okay, here are the trash trucks. Okay, here we go.
Philadelphia participated today in a rally to support less restrictive adoption information laws. As Steve Levy reports, it's all part of a 250-mile march from New York to Washington to push for more access to adoption records.
Let our freedom ring. That freedom expressed in their name, HEAL, honesty and equality in adoption laws. They are former adopted children, parents of adopted children, and natural birth parents.
On the 19th of July, I met my son for the first time and spoke to him since the day I surrendered him for adoption 21 years ago.
A wonderful experience, she says, and expects a future relationship. But they say that 47 of the 50 states have laws sealing records at the time of adoption. And the denial of that information is harmful to mental well-being, says a psychotherapist and former adoptee.
40% of the people in mental health care in this country are adopted. Only 2.5% of the country are adopted. Why are all those people in mental health care?
Is that cause? Has that been proven?
Yes, absolutely.
Denial of what they say is a basic right also can cause medical problems. If an actual parent is prone to a disease the child doesn't know about. There are opponents. Invasion of privacy, often a reason. A recent bill in Delaware allows access to birth information if all parties agree. In New Jersey, a bill allowing access is currently blocked in an assembly committee. Pennsylvania does not allow access to birth certificates. A supporter of that, State Representative Stephen Friend contends, without anonymity, it would provide an incentive for a woman to choose abortion over giving birth to her child.
Let the burden be on them to go to the agency or somewhere to register so that their name can't be found. I don't agree that will cause more abortions at all.
This march culminates on Saturday, August the 5th, in front of the Lincoln Memorial, when its theme song will be sung by Freddie Cole, brother of Nat King Cole. It's titled, I Wonder Who My Daddy Is, in a further attempt to draw attention to their cause. Steve Levy, Channel 10 News.
Philadelphia detectives tonight
Okay.
investigate.
Couple flaws in that story, although it's basically good and good public perception, good positive aspect overall. Did you hear him use the term adopted children? See any children in there? One thing to do, and that points out one point I did want to cover, I overlooked. Make sure that you define your terms. It's on Leo's handout. And specifically, I have had many times people call us adopted children. You can listen politely, say, well, you know, I'm no longer a child. The term that I use is adoptee. All children grow up. We are adults now. We're talking about issues that are adult in nature, and that's the term that we use. You may still find adopted children thrown back at you. You consistently use the terms that you need to use, and the message does eventually get across. Most of the time, I have had reporters or an interview person say, gee, thanks, thanks for clarifying, I didn't know that. It's usually an issue of ignorance, not maliciousness. The other thing, we walk a very fine line when we start talking about our pain, our mental distress, and why we need this information. We walk a very fine line of hurting our own credibility. Because do you think too many people are going to listen to John Hinckley talking about gun control? Let's face it, it does not serve our needs. We need to look as credible, respectable, mature, adult, whatever you want to use, those terms, articulate as possible. We do not need to bring this extraneous, controversial information about mental distress, mental health. Yes, we all have been through pain. We've all suffered because of adoption. We need to bring that out very carefully in a way that does not harm our credibility. I think Nancy Horgan's interview brought that out. Yes, I think, I searched for ages. I met him for the first time. It was wonderful. It put to rest questions I had for years. Not, I am seeing a psychiatrist 4 times a week because I could not deal with this issue. There's a distinct difference. You need to be aware that that is often used against us. These people are a sick minority is something that we often hear, and that's something we just can't abide. Want to show the Today Show? The Today Show is the big leagues, media coverage. We had an interview on for the May 1st National Open My Records Day.
Arrived to flood courthouses with petitions demanding information from sealed adoption files. Petition drive will be supported by demonstrations and rallies across the country staged by adoptees, their birth parents, and adoptive parents and siblings, all of whom would like to see a change in the way adoption records are handled. One of those who is seeking access to her file is Joan Graham of Pembroke Pines, Florida, who's here this morning along with her adoptive mother, Ray Kieran. Good morning to both of you. Good morning. Good morning. Joan, what are you hoping to find out?
What I'm searching for is to know my birth parents. I'd like to know the circumstances surrounding my birth. I'd like to know if I have brothers or sisters.
You've been trying to find this out for a long time. What kind of success have you had?
Not much. I've got non-identifying information, which consists of not much either. My birth mother's age of birth, her height, weight, and that's about it.
So you have no way of knowing if you have siblings, anyone in the country?
No.
Obviously, this was something that you must have discussed with your parents beforehand. And Ms. Kieran, I know you and your late husband told Joan to do this with your blessings.
Yes, from the very time that we adopted Joan, when she had no idea as to what we were talking about, we told her she was adopted. And I am all for the records being open to her, not only to her, to other adoptees too. I'm responsible for 3 other children being adopted, and many more who feel the same way.
Was there not some concern on your part? I'm sure that there are some adoptive parents who would feel a little sense of rejection in knowing that their child wanted to know more about their birth family.
Yes, we are very well aware of that, and we are willing to accept anything. We hope that if Joan and other adoptees are able to find the lady who gave them for adoption, and they can become one big happy family, they discover their brothers and sisters, have access to their health records, this would make us very happy.
Is that what you want, Joan, to be one big happy family with the woman who gave birth to you?
If it could be. The expectation I don't think is really that. But I just need to know all the information medically, who I look like, why am I left-handed, do my children look like anybody in their families, that kind of information.
Would you want to meet this woman?
Yes.
What if she doesn't want to meet you? It's been a long time since she gave birth.
It's been 41 years. I think I would have to deal with that when the time came. However, if she didn't want to meet with me, it would, I guess it would bother me. But she would have to answer questions for me to satisfy, because I've been brought up in a lovely home. This is my mother. And I just need this information.
It is obviously an issue of great concern to you and one of curiosity, too, as much as anything. And it's a concern to birth parents around the country. Michael McCann is president of the Gladney Center in Fort Worth, Texas. That's one of the largest adoption agencies and maternity homes in the country. He's at our affiliate there, KXAS-TV. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
You have dealt with women, birth mothers, who have been approached years later by the children they gave up for adoption. With what sort of reactions do these meetings occur?
Mixed. Not all of them are wonderful. We would like to say that all reunions were great. They're not always great. But sometimes people have shown up where they weren't prepared and no one knew they were coming, or someone just came to see them and their husband didn't know that they'd placed a child previously, nor did their children. It's not always great. It's just one of those unfortunate things. There are ways to do this that allow people to decide whether they want to get together or not, and that's what we would like to see instead.
What way, then, could a person like Joan Graham satisfy her need to know more about her background and yet protect the privacy of perhaps the woman who gave birth to her?
There are 22 states that have mutual consent registries where both parties, both the adoptee and the birth parent, must express their desire to get together through signing up for a registry. If they do, then they can get together, and they have both decided they wish to do this, as opposed to someone showing up and wanting to meet the other person. We've had situations where birth parents have just shown up somewhere to see an adoptee, and it was most upsetting to them. It shouldn't be this way.
As you're talking, you can't see Joan shaking her head, but I can. This is not a good idea as far as you're concerned.
Mr. McMahon, what if my birth mother were dead? She couldn't register. What if she didn't know about the registry? Some of them, you have fees and maybe she couldn't afford it. Where do you go then?
The fee in Texas is $7, so I don't think that's very much, and the $7 is not a handicap to anyone. As far as her not knowing about it, I think that's what our time should be spent on, is publicizing registry so people do know about them, so it's a fair way for everyone to be reunited if they wish to. And if she is dead, then you can't meet her anyway, so it's kind of a moot point.
No, because if she were dead and she had family, I could find out information that I needed.
Well, I'm sure then you could find out about your birth father if he is alive. And just because one party is dead doesn't mean the other one is. The registry works as it works in other states. It's a fair way because it's non-invasive, it's non-intrusive. And that seems like everyone has a right to privacy and their rights to confidentiality. We don't know what's going on in their life since then. They perhaps, are not in favor of this reunion. Or perhaps we get unpleasant surprises that we don't want. We may find out that our adoptees have not done as well, or that our birth parents are not Cinderella.
What about this other idea of going forward and petitioning the court to open the records, which will be done around the country today?
Personally, I'm not in favor of it, and our agency isn't in favor of it. We would rather see people have the right to do things through a registry. It's a simpler, easier way, and it gets into other issues as well. That there may be things about previous pregnancies that a person had that would come out through these through the medical records that would be released. There may be abortions and other things that someone has chosen to do. They're no one's business.
Well, it is an issue that we've discussed before, and I'm sure we'll be talking about again. Ms. Graham, we wish you well. Ms. Karen, thank you for being with us. And Mr. McCann in Texas, thank you. 22 minutes after the...
I love spokespeople for the opposition like that.
Do you know about the statistics for the Texas Registry?
No.
I don't know exactly how many years it's been in existence. The last time I heard it was recently. They have had 3 reunions.
That's one thing that AAC would really like to do. Yeah, set up to prevent, just like New York, which has been in existence since 1983 and has yet to have a match.
In Ohio, they've had 4 years, and one was arranged.
They've had 2? I'd heard they had none, but yeah.
Yeah, I communicate with these people from Texas that have a young man who was going back to Gladney every year to try to get information, and his birth mother was coming every year, and they were, even after the registry went into existence, they were not telling his birth mother about it, and finally when he found her, he said, why didn't you tell her? And they said, she didn't ask, and we're under no obligation to tell her.
Exactly.
They said,
There's a situation like that. They told
Yeah, we have situations also. We know both parties have inquired, and that's, that's education at that level. The point of bringing in the Today Show, the people were coached. They were coached on both sides extensively. I was up half the night with Joan and her mother beforehand. I think you have to account for facts like nerves. They were incredibly nervous. They were shaking. They had been sitting in the Today Show offices since 6 in the morning. They get out there with Upper Marvel, who talks like she has marbles in her mouth anyway. And they had, at the last moment, Joan had, I think her mother had a cheat sheet, a little going like that. And they took it away for us. No time. Won't be able to do it. There are some intimidation factors kind of used, or at least they felt kind of intimidated by the whole setting. Anytime you get into a TV station, it is intimidating. That's one thing. You have to be very well rehearsed yourself so that you come across almost on automatic pilot. And of course, Mr. McMahon had been coached. You saw how he got that initial answer and got right into the issue of registries as an alternative. We had been prepared for that. Joan knew exactly how to hit back at it. He never did answer that question fully. If you look at that, now we all have a bias watching this in this room. The general public looks at that story. Who do you think comes out on top as the winner? It may not be 100%, it may not be an A+ effort from our side, but it certainly came out on top, and that's the kind of thing we need to see more of. Anybody have any other questions?
You're saying that the general public perceives him to be more credible?
Sorry, can't hear you, Martin.
The general public perception of that was what?
I feel that Joan was the winner, that our viewpoint was the winner on that. Okay, I do have a few copies of the AAC's suggested questions and answer sheet for anyone who needs to feel like they have some background, some statistics, some viewpoints. We call it pat answers to pat questions, and anybody who'd like one, I think I have probably close to enough.